Alexa, show me how to make a cocktail without alcohol.
Sure.
Hey, all you songbirds. Thanks for tuning in to Tailfeather this week. We are on episode number 6 in season 1. This is going to be the conclusion of Bringing Brands to Life series. It's 4 parts in the entire series this time. And we have the one and the only Mr. Anthony Pullen to pass the baton to wrap this race up. We are going to talk about putting action to plan. Last week we talked about some micro scale, or last episode we talked about the micro scale of the business plan, what it looked like on a shoestring budget, and why you make the choices you make with trade shows. Mr. Pullen, as I like to call him, our guest this week, has a massive background in launching brands. He understands the thick and thin of it from point A to point B. So without any further ado, Mr. Anthony Pullen, I'm going to refer to you as Pullen or AP through the rest of this episode. Please introduce yourself to our listeners and our viewers.
Yeah, well, hello. I don't know if I'm the right person to wrap this up in a bow, but as you said, Nick. But yeah, my name's Anthony. You can hear from the funny voice. I'm originally from London, England, but I've lived in the United States for, I guess, what am I at now? 2024, right? So 14 years now in total. But worked in the beverage space, everything from when I was younger, working behind the bar, cleaning ashtrays. Believe it or not, they used to exist in bars, and all the way to now, running the organization at Liars for North America. So yeah, as you mentioned, Nick, a wide range of history there.
Yeah. He's being a little modest, folks. He has launched some massive brands. We're not going to get into what they are, but he has taken things from incubation to well over the finish line. So I'm going to blow you up because I know how humble you can be at times. So we're going to talk about a lot of fun stuff when it comes to starting a business. For full disclosure, and all of us know this, Tailfeather is powered by Liars for the entire first season. Both of us work for Liars in our normal day-to-day work. And we are now in the 5th year, just entered the 5th year of our existence as a brand, but our 7th year as a concept. So there's a lot of steps that happen between point A and point B for where we were and where we are. And to give the listeners a reminder of what they heard on the last episode, that brand, Jas, is in its incubacy. It's in that second year of movement. Liars is in its 5th, so things scale differently, especially once you get investors and board of directors, and things change a lot. So I want to get the perspective of, we're out of the honeymoon phase, but we are further into the operational phase and inventory control and all the fun stuff that we talk about on a weekly basis. So I guess the first question I'm going to pose to you is going to be, what steps after constructing the team are left? You've got essential steps in launching a brand. You've got your experiences that you have historically that help you manage the North American business unit. So what do you do after the team is constructed? We're out in the field, marketing is happening, on trade is happening, off trade is happening. What are the major steps in accordance to maybe logistics do you look at?
There's a lot of layers to that. I guess if you're looking at an evolution of a brand, typically it's kind of like that 3 to 5 year gap. And you're right, it's when investment starts coming in. A lot of managing up has to happen, as well as a lot of managing down. And I think one of the trip hazards for that transition is working on efficiency. So in the beginning, a lot of brands that certainly I've worked with are very opportunistic, right? So it's like we can get anywhere, very agile, working to take advantage of and maximize any opportunity that comes along. As you start to get a cadence and your distribution has grown, you're looking now for velocity typically within accounts. That's going to be your main driver, and that requires a lot of efficiency and effectiveness inside of the organization. So I guess it starts with the team identifying what the clear mission and vision of the company or the brand is, and then really starting to sharpen the blade about how everyone goes about every decision And that's everything. So logistics wise, for example, that would be things like inventory. Do we have to hold this much inventory or that much inventory? We should have at year 4 to 5 a good idea of what your rate of sale is, so you can start to manage your I guess your exposure to the amount of stock that you're producing and holding, and also begin to get the belief from the distributors that you're using, especially in the liquor space, to hold the correct inventory for you for your customers to order. So you have that nice, efficient flow through of stock, and basically all you do is spend, or at least I do for a lot of the time, is spend time trying to not get too many pinch points along that chain, and keep things moving through it. Yeah. I think
you just mentioned
that's just one example of logistics. I mean, there's so many more.
Well, I know that a lot of our listeners and viewers for this subset inside of season 1, this mini series, if you will, are in that startup phase. They're in trying to figure out distributorship management. They're in trying to figure out, do I hire a brand ambassador? You don't. You put your feet on the street and go talk to people yourselves. There's all these initial crucial hires, right? But you mentioned pinch point and distributor management. And I know that a lot of people are going to go, what kind of pinch points should I be looking for? And you also mentioned inventory control. Is there anything that you can expand on in regard to some, like maybe 1 or 2 examples of what a pinch point might be?
Well, I mean, they can be things that just pop up, and they could be things that could just almost be festering, right? So, say for example, if you were to launch a new SKU, right? You have this idea for this innovation that you want to launch. If your core brand is not rotating inside of the distributor, and you haven't done really a lot with them to grow the business, it's going to be very, very difficult to have a conversation with them to increase the number of SKUs that you have available. However, if you have worked with them and you have built that relationship and they trust you, it's a lot easier. So with Liars, I mean, I've lost count of how many SKUs we've had and taken away and moved around, but we grew really fast, and we ran into that because it wasn't just our responsibility. It's a category that was still trying to establish itself. In a lot of ways, it still is. I don't think we're there yet, but you have to build the trust to in order to do that ask. So that could be a pinch point again. But another example would be just the positive would be your brand goes on absolute fire. Some random influencer somewhere picked it up and posted about it, and all of a sudden you're out of stock, and you can't move, you can't physically move boxes quick enough to feed the beast. So there's another one that you just have to be, and you can't plan for those things, but you can you can insulate yourself a little bit.
Right on. I try to relate some of this stuff back to the bar world because, again, a lot of our viewership or listenership might be bartenders and people that are making career transitions or maybe starting a brand. And I would attune this as much as we possibly can to maybe forecasting for your quarter. You know that you do X amount of drinks the quarter before. You can plan on X amount of the said cocktail on your list for the quarter moving forward, so you can buy and rotate your stock. It all goes back to having a plan to move whatever it is you have on your shelf, right? And it's the same thing from our side, is putting a plan behind a distributor when we go in and we need distributor X to bring in 4 pallets of SKU Y. I need to make sure that I back that distributor up with a plan on how they can move it and how we can help them move it. So it's not really that different than that kind of mentality around planning for a product movement.
Yeah, you've got to have a place to put it.
Yeah. Make sure you have a place to put it, right? Like, don't ask them to pull in 4 pallets if you've got like 4 accounts that are going to buy a bottle every other week or something along those lines. It's just not gonna help either party, and it's pretty important, especially in the logistics side of things, that we look at partnerships and that we fortify partnerships with people and companies, because according to the U.S. government, a person and a company are the same entity, which I do not believe in at all. But I do want to make sure that we keep it on a personal level, that you're forging relationships with people like buyers and directors and bartenders, but those ultimately dial up into a corporation if you're working with a hotel group or if you're working with a large restaurant group, which we'll talk about later on. All right, so we've chatted about logistics for a couple of minutes. Let's look at making the brand stick. So looking at a trade introduction, trade shows. We talked about trade shows a lot in the last episode, but I do want to get a different lens on it because we're a different company, right? We're a medium-sized team, and we operate at a very high level when it comes to creativity and design, and how we create the experience that you're going to receive when you try lyres at trade shows. So I do want to talk about, and we'll talk about this with JCon in a much later episode, but I do want to kind of touch on when you look at trade shows and you look at trade introduction, what are some of the aspects of the larger trade shows, like the expos, like Tails, like BCB? What are some of the things that you look at for on trade and off trade that you want to implement to make the brand stick? Like, how are you making the brand stick with maybe like a Marriott or a Hyatt or a Hilton?
Yeah, so I think first of all, with any brand, right, you've got to have your own identity, and you've got to be very clear what your intent and your customer is, right? So some brands, nightclub and bar show here in Las Vegas makes sense. Other brands, Tales of the Cocktail might make more sense. Or for some brands, it's better to go to fancy food and just go full retail. So having a very clear sense of what your brand is trying to accomplish, again, that goes back to your mission vision. And then also having a clear kind of idea of where the people that would purchase your brand are likely to be. Now, those people that are purchasing could be consumers, of course, if you're going direct to consumer, but it could also be trade people if you're doing things B2B. So therein lies the first filter when you decide to do a show. And when you decide to do a show, it can't just be something, in my experience, it can't just be something that's about just the liquid in the bottle. It has to be the brand coming to life. And you have to provide. A lot of the brands that I've worked for and the categories that I've worked for are kind of emerging categories and new. So there's a lot of education tied to this. That's what you do with lyres as well, is that education layer. But it's not education just on the juice itself, or it's it's this mash bill if you're doing a whiskey, or it's this strain of agave, all of those things. It's more education on how to use the product and how to get the best out of it. Because I remember if you look at Steve Jobs, when he talks about an iPhone, he's not talking about processing power or any of those measurables. He's talking about how it makes you feel and how it's going to change your experience in day-to-day life. If you can make that come alive in a trade show, and there's very smart ways you can do it without spending a lot of money, you're going to really have a strong impact. So if you couple that, make the brand come to life in front of, so right brand, right people, right activities, and the right place, you're gonna do well and have an impact, because these things are expensive. So even as an organization as old as we are, we have to thin the herd. You could do a cocktail week in every major US city every week of the year. You could probably do two.
Yeah.
And then you've got all the national stuff and all the other things. So you can't boil the ocean. You're gonna have to cherry pick it. So making intelligent decisions come about knowing who you are and a good idea of who you're going to change their lives with your product is.
Right on. I love the fact that you talk about making sure that you show them how they feel with the product, and that they get that experiential aspect of not just liquid to lips aspect, but how do I use this in a soiree if I decide to do it at home, or how do I use this behind my bar, or how do I use this in hotels, which kind of brings us over to the importance of national accounts. And for viewers and listeners out there, the audience out there, national accounts would be large groups, so things like Darden or Landry's. National accounts could be hotels. National accounts could be gyms, like a spin system or maybe some type of CrossFit box. I mean, national accounts range depending on what your industry is. For us, it could be a myriad of things, because we are adjacent to alcohol. We're not alcohol, but we're adjacent because we're an adult-oriented beverage. So we kind of play in the same lane as that, but we're because we're not alcohol, we have the opportunity to be able to play and jump in other sandboxes as well, and in industries that are adjacent to us and make sense to us. So my question for you and for the audience at large listening, why are national accounts important to a company that's ramping up, has stable inventory, um, and how we're going to forecast over the next year? And the reason I'm asking this is because our industry lives in a microcosm, right? We think that everyone around us thinks like us and acts like us and drinks like us and consumes like us, when in actuality, some of our best friends have no idea what a DTO is. They have no idea what a Ferrari is, right? They have zero inclination of what any of that lingo is. The person in the middle of Kansas or Nebraska somewhere is still happy with their Orange Crush or their macro lager. So why are national accounts important to the Liars brand and to upcoming brands for what that matters?
Reasons. I mean, the most obvious one is they make you a lot of money because they sell a lot of drinks, and a lot of them are typically compliant. But if you take that out of it, I mean, the way I define a national account is that you have either a single individual or group of individuals. It's doing that thing on the avatar. I've got to figure out how to turn that off. You have you have either a small group of individuals or one individual who makes the decisions for a lot of different outlets, and those outlets typically involve menu placements. So what that allows us, and why it's important for us at Liars, is now that we have faith in our distributors and we have a full distribution network across the United States, we can go and speak to these individuals or small groups and help them understand the opportunity that there is in non-alc in our case, or it could have been whatever it is that your brand is selling. And you have to have that conversation with only a small group, and they can affect a massive number of venues. Now, that brings obvious advantages, but the best one of it is time. Because once you've done this and you've come to an agreement with them and everyone's aligned, you can set this for a year and it will just roll and roll and roll. And so long as you're managing your inventory, and at that point in time, you should have a good idea, hey, if we put a menu, a Liars drink in our case, on a steakhouse menu, we know roughly how many drinks per month that's going to go through. So we can communicate that to our distributor, and we say, you're probably going to have to carry this much inventory. We add it to our forecast, and the list goes on. Now, that's obviously in an ideal world. You've got compliance things you have to deal with. You've got asks for LTOs that might be happening. Lots of variables can continue. But what it allows you to do is just spend time with a few individuals that can affect a large amount of menus. Now, if the consumer is looking at your brand, it's a great way of getting eyes on your brand in places that you don't necessarily have people pushing it, or billboards or targeted ads or whatever you're using to spread your word. So you use Nebraska as an example, right? So we get brand presence in Nebraska because of the partners that we have in national accounts. We wouldn't hire someone to go and manage the Nebraska market yet, because we're too early. That would be a much larger, more established organization that would do that. But national accounts are your foothold into that. And plus, typically, they're great to work with, right? I've worked for national accounts when I was coming up through the bartending world before I went independent, and their S&OPs are great. They're solid. So they normally do what they say you're going to do, which on the independent side can be hit or miss, right? You could be dealing with a different bar manager within 2 weeks if in some cities, because there's such a there's such a lack of talent pool. So it's competitive out there. There's a lot of advantages there, but you do have to you have to package your message to make sense to the massive rollout and scale that this organization is going to have to do this drink strategy at, for example.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of strategy involved in national accounts and logistics, and you're at the helm of all of it. You're helping direct where things go and how they work and why we spend the dollars that we spend, where we spend them. And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle for the U.S. team and the global team at large. And I think it's pretty rad that if you look at our historical lens and what we were doing like maybe 10 or 12 years ago versus where we are now, and don't fret, people, those of you launching brands, it may not take 10 or 12 years for you to get the kind of insight that we're sharing with you today. But it's crazy to think that those skill sets that we learned way back when, if you're paying attention and you take notes, is one of our mutual friends says, when you fail, take notes. I've taken a lot of notes. That you can take those skill sets and hone them and apply them to other positions in your life. And I think that's pretty rad. Speaking of positions, we are now in a position where we need to take a commercial break. So we here at Tailfeather are powered by Liars Non-Alcoholic. We're going to take a short break, have a message from our friends over at Liars come in. It'll be some fun little short 15, 30-second thing, and then we'll be right back with you. You're listening to Tailfeather with Nick Crutchfield, and today my esteemed guest is Mr. Anthony Pullen. We'll be right back.
The Liar's non-alcoholic pink spritz.
I taste the world through rose-coloured glasses.
Delicious. Stay spirited. Make it a Liar's.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. Glad to have you back here on Tailfeather. Once again, I'm Nick Crutchfield. This is Anthony Pullen. We just stopped talking about national accounts. We might talk about them a little bit more in the second half of the show. The first half of the show, we discussed logistics and trade shows. We've talked about national accounts. I want to kind of take this back to on-trade a little bit more and talk about the shifting of hospitality and where we're going as a business unit along with this wave of how hospitality is evolving. And I think if we look back to our alcohol years, both of us have worked in big alcohol before, and we look at on-trade and how brands can be made by on-trade. I think that's maybe shifted a little bit. I think off-trade for a long time didn't get the kind of concentration that it should have, because you can either sell a drink every time somebody orders a cocktail, or you can sell a whole bottle. So it's that kind of mentality against that. And I think when we look at COVID and the Voldemort word of our world right now, when we look at COVID and we look at how we shifted to off-premise, and a lot of companies grew like, I want to say it was like 400% year over year that first few months. It was absolutely insane. And then people went, holy shit, what am I doing? And had to back off a little bit. And the waves are starting to kind of roll through, and we're seeing some of our friends shut down institutions. We're seeing some of our friends go completely sober. Some people are just changing their consumption models. When we look at how the pandemic and hospitality shifted its models for the non-alc and low-abv spaces, how important, and I know this is kind of a curveball considering what I just spoke about, how important do you think e-com and off-premise are now? And specifically, I want to talk about grocery at some point during this, but let's just talk about the e-com models, so e-commerce and off-premise, in regard to how hospitality models have shifted.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's a lot there. What we saw, obviously through COVID, we had that waterbed effect of on-premise and off-premise, right? So on-premise essentially closed, all the volume goes here. I remember working for an organization where that happened, and the retail team were like, we're going to hit our bonus. And the on-premise team were like, what the hell's going on? Great way to divide a team, by the way, managing that through. There was a lot of that going, but there was that kind of ether that was going on that was e-com. We call it e-commerce, but if we could bundle it all together as direct to consumer, a lot of that kind of basically took off, and it was, we saw a lot of investment in things like DoorDash and I guess Tausbesorgt is what it was in Europe, but that's Uber Eats, all those third party apps, and that's symbolic of what was happening. What we really got out of it from brand perspective is that when you're selling direct to consumer and e-com is taking off because people were they were scared to leave their homes, right? So they were ordering it online. You're capturing so much data on the consumption habits and this, the general information of where they are geographically and how old they are and their gender and all of this kind of stuff. What that allowed a lot of brands to do is, hang on a second, our consumer is not who we thought it was, because you don't necessarily get all that information from a Nielsen report or a VIP report that you would get from a B2B. So a lot of brands were able to really chisel into exactly who their consumer was and how they're consuming their product. So that e-com has allowed that to happen. And then you've got obviously the habitual behavior of just ordering your stuff online, or subscribing to subscription boxes where it just gets delivered. Amazon jumped on that with a lot of their stuff, where it was, you could just for the rest of your life, you're just going to get this much toilet paper delivered to your house every X number of weeks, or whatever you need. So that became habitual, and I think it still is. So having e-com, but the thing with e-com is much like we were talking about with the trade shows. You have to be really smart about how you present your brand. And it's not just about liquid to lips and stats. It's making it come alive. And that's a lot harder to do on a digital platform than it is in real life if you were to have, be on a trade show floor. So the brands that have managed to do that have done very, very well. And fortunately, the brands that didn't take advantage of that have probably done poorly. And that's the transition. And I think now, if you call it the post-COVID or era, or whatever we want to call it, waking up, or there's a whole bunch of different analogies I'm sure you can make. But I think all three of those go hand in hand. So that retail presence, being available on premise, and having a digital presence, which is essentially what your e-com business is. If all three of those are humming together and sending the same message and creating the same feeling and presenting the same solutions to the problems you don't know you had, you're going to be fine. But if you neglect one of them, you'll get that waterbed effect, and everything will go out of balance. And like a bad cocktail, it's just not going to sell well.
Yeah. Love both those analogies. Hadn't heard the waterbed effect before, and I'm definitely going to use that moving forward. And if you got a crap cocktail, it's a crap cocktail. And first rule of cocktails: use the best ingredients you possibly can within reason in COGS models. So you just brought up a good point that you kind of got my wheels turning towards the end of it. And there's a whole new data set, right? Because we looked at DTC, and the brands that did it well got new data and understand the consumer better than they ever had before. But the other side of that, the inverse of that, is that, well, let me expand that first. Off-trade is doing real well because of that new data set, because they understand the DTC models, because they can focus almost like a sun ray on what needs to happen in order to sell to customers ABC groups, right? How does, and I'm going to challenge all the suppliers out there real quick, how do you take that data and help on-trade survive in a true partnership manner? Because you've got this new data set that on-trade doesn't completely understand, right? You've got restaurant, especially the independents. The groups might understand it. The groups might have access to that kind of data. National accounts might have that kind of access to that kind of data. But when you look at independents or smaller groups, your mom and pops of the world, how do they get that data, look at it, and go, okay, they see this as a direct-to-consumer model, and these are the attributes that equal Group A, Group B, Group C. How do you think, and this is a loaded question, I get that, how do you think we can take that data and help an on-trade, on-premise account universe succeed? Because it's new data to them. They don't understand their consumers as well as big companies do at this point.
Can I actually give you a live example?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a liquor store in Boulder, Colorado, that is one of our top performing stores in the country, independent stores in the country. And
wow, Boulder?
In Boulder, Colorado.
That's amazing. Okay.
Right next to the university. Okay.
Oh.
So we were like, well, this is strange. maybe we've got a little hot pocket here that we can activate in. So we pulled up the on-premise accounts in Colorado, and in Boulder, Colorado. If you know anything about Colorado, they don't have a lot of chains there. They have a lot of independents, both liquor stores and on-premise. And what we noticed was that there was almost zero footprint on-premise. Now, this tells us as a brand, hang on a second, there's people in this community that are shopping at that store. They're likely going to this or involved with this institution that happens to be here, and they're probably frequenting the bars in the area. So we did a little look at who these places were, and if they these on-premise outlets were, and if they were taking non-alc seriously. And then, in the realization that wasn't the case, we took the reps from the distributor in a very specific region and put them to work trying to establish non-alcoholic cocktails, in our case, in those bars. And we used Dry January as an anchor point for that, because it's in the zeitgeist. And what we're seeing now is these pale aces are now purchasing lights. Now, yeah, that's great for us, woohoo. But what we've done is we've actually told these operators, hey, there's a customer base here that is looking for non-alcoholic options in our case, because we sell non-alcoholic, and you're probably missing an opportunity here to upgrade someone from a Diet Coke to a 12, or what they charge there, but let's assume $8 to $12 for a non-alcoholic cocktail. And their eyes light up like, wow, we know those people are in the community. So what we did is we took the retail data that we were seeing, repurposed it on a geographical level, and we didn't have to do any social media ads. We didn't take any influencers. We did nothing other than program the distributor to put a little bit of focus on it. And guess what? We sell more liars, consumers get more non-alcoholic beverages, and the bars are generating more revenue than they ever did selling Diet Coke. So I think that's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, I do too. And that's such a smart way to look at data and to use time efficiently, right? A big thing that we talk about in this podcast is time as a currency, and there's only so much of it. It's one of the things that is truly finite. And being able to apply those systems, essentially, and have them work in favor and help those on-premise generate a better profit margin is even better. For those of you listening, restaurants typically, especially mom and pops, like independents is what we call them, typically run on about a 3 or 4% profit margin, which isn't a whole lot when you take away all your operating costs that include labor and stock and all that. So anything that we can do to help people raise more capital inside their businesses is better for both parties. Actually, all three parties, because our distributor also gets to stay in business as well. And we like that because we don't want to drive delivery trucks. Do you, Pullen? I don't want to drive a delivery truck. I did that before. It sucks.
I don't think anybody listening wants me driving delivery trucks.
It's fun. It's just really hard work. It's actually a very fun job. So you mentioned on-trade, and I want to expand a little bit more. And the Brits have an amazing term that I just learned about recently called the knock-on effect. What exactly, can you please explain what the knock-on effect is to our friends out there? And then expand on that, and maybe let's touch on investor relations and that kind of work when it comes to launching brands.
A knock-on is, I think it's a fully British thing. It's certainly something we use in Britain. I know the Aussies use it. I know South Africans use it. It might actually be a rugby reference, because a knock-on is right on. You drop the ball forward, but for our context, it means you're doing something that moves something forward, or changes something moving forward. So there's a knock-on effect to national accounts, I guess. So outside of what we were talking about, logistics-wise and volume-wise, what they can affect with small decision makers, is there's other things, intangibles, right? So if you're building an investment deck, you're trying to get people to invest in your company, and you have one of these big banners that everyone recognizes. I don't know, it's a Fleming Steakhouse, or Ocean Air, which is part of Landry's, or Marriott, or St. Regis, which is inside of Marriott, of course. Any of those kind of banners, it looks good, right? It looks juicy. It gives you credibility. And so if you're building your brand, it could be as simple as putting that on an investor deck and you get to claim it. You also can use it as leverage in terms of, hey, if you're selling on e-commerce, you can also find us at this place. You have to be careful with alcohol and discus rules there, but there's ways of subtly communicating those kind of things. And you also have, just in general, a feeling that you're moving the needle. A lot of other brands, if, say for example, if you look in Landry's, Darden, a couple of other concepts, just to say, your Red Lobster or something like this, other groups are going to follow. They're going to look at that and go, well, what are we missing out on here? Why is those things? Same thing in the hotel chains, right? So you get a few, then you get a lot. So it's just another way of building efficiencies. And that would be a knock-on effect. You get one, you get three. You get one, you spend a bunch of money getting a placement at one of the hotel groups, and you put it in your investor deck. The knock-on effect is maybe you get some more money to spend for another one. So it's produce more stock for another one.
Right on. Well, I like the term. It's much better than snowball effect and much better than domino effect, because it's always moving forward. All right. Well, thank you for your information and your insight into what we've talked about thus far. It is now time for me to throw you on the grill. This is where we are going to put you into the impromptu question section of the show. And here is your question, Mr. Anthony Pullen. You're in Vegas. This is where you live. What are your top 2 hidden spots for visiting, and why? Meaning maybe somewhere that you like to go and chill and have a no-low beverage, and maybe you're local. Like, what are 2 things that people can't miss that you really enjoy when they come to Vegas?
There's a lot in Vegas,
right?
I think if I stick to hidden gems, right, and where you might find me that you won't necessarily hear about that much. There's a new spot that's opened called Stray Pirate. It's been put together by a guy named Chris Gutierrez, who's done a whole bunch of different beverage projects downtown for many, many years. He's amazing behind the bar, great host, makes incredible drinks. He runs a really, really strong team, and and I'm a dog guy over a cat guy, so so Stray Pirate is all of the characters in the bar are different mutts that find themselves on a boat, and you're in the boat. It has that experiential feel to it, and he does really, really good cocktails, food, and the atmosphere is pretty cool. So I suggest you check that one out. He's doing a great job. Also have a bunch of Liars cocktails on there as well, which is great to see, because we have those animals as well. So it ties in nicely to the thing, like the branding works. So he's dialed back his consumption. He's part of our chef cycle team as well. So he's a big advocate for it. And then the other one, talking chef cycle, is a lot of people get stuck on the strip or downtown. If you get the opportunity to go out into like Red Rock or into one of the national parks, there's multiple around here. The outdoors is amazing, but out towards Red Rock Canyon, which is a big tourist pool, there's a tiny little spot called Cottonwood Saloon. And inside there it's inside the village of Blue Diamond, and often we have a cycling team that's part of the local gym, and we'll ride the 30 miles out to this place. You don't have to ride; you can take the car as well. As plenty of driving there, and we stop in. And they do really good pizza. It's just one of those spots. It feels like you're going back in time in like a Western movie. So for me as an Englishman, it's kind of cute, but it's out there. It's full of locals. You often see like car enthusiasts out there driving their car, their go-to kind of. There's a motorbike clubs out there. Everything's out there. If you want to go mountain biking, you can go mountain biking. Road biking, you can go out there. 4-wheeling, you can do that. It's pretty cool. So Cottonwood Saloon out in Blue Diamond. Nick, when you're in town, I'll take you out there. Yeah,
definitely. That sounds really cool. I grew up, of course, being Gen X American. I grew up watching Western movies, and and all those silly ass spaghetti westerns. They're so fun, and I love seeing border towns or frontier towns that are kind of still modeled after that. Now we're at the point where we do plugs, and this is where you can mention anything that you want to. You mentioned Chef Cycle. You can definitely expand on that if you like. You can mention anything that you want to, things that you're working on, new projects, anything that you want the public to know about with Mr. AP.
Oof, yeah, let's start with Chef Cycle. So Chef Cycle, I'm going to be doing in May. I do it every year. We ride 300 miles in Santa Rosa, raising money for No Kid Hungry. And it's a bunch of celebrity chefs, a bunch of people that are in the beverage industry. We have one of our hotel partners that takes part, and they contribute really well, is Skimpton. And essentially everybody who's riding is attempting to raise money to go to No Kid Hungry. And if you don't know about No Kid Hungry, what that does is it helps underprivileged families and children have access to regular food, because they have the belief that if you have regular meals, you can function better in society, and your schoolwork is going to be better, your lifestyle is going to be better, and you just need to keep people keep people satiated.
Right on. Well, thank you so much, Songbirds, for tuning in. Anthony, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate everything that you're doing and the Chef Cycle project. Folks, if you don't know about Chef Cycle, Anthony, is there a website they can visit for Chef Cycle?
Yeah, chefcycle.org.
Okay, so check out chefcycle.org. I'm going to hit you up later on and talk more about that, because if I'm in the States, that might be something I want to do. Folks out there, you can catch us at any of your favorite podcast hosting sites. You can catch us on YouTube. Once again, one good thing is moved over to TikTok. I'm not doing that on this platform anymore, so check us out over on TikTok. Thank you to all our songbirds out there for tuning in and listening to what we have to share with you. That's a wrap. Put a feather in my cap. From the nest, I'm Nick Crutchfield. He's Anthony Pullen. We'll see you next time on Tail Feather. Have a good day, folks.
Bye.
Alexa, show me how to make a cocktail without alcohol.
Sure.